When you said hit
Glad
and
we're already
spin bitch,
recording.
and then I miss Heather's, Ricky, I thought you were talking about like a spin place.
No, I know
Like-
exactly
No.
what she meant.
Heather's, the spin, like
There's actually nothing I hate more than a spin class.
really.
I feel like I join a cult every time I go to a
do.
spin class.
Most of them, the good ones.
But isn't adulthood just finding your cult? I feel like that is like, I think we found our own cults. Whether it is a cult of CrossFit or church or spin class or jujitsu or something. I feel like everybody has a cult. They just don't want to think of it as a cult.
So I like that you use cult. I would phrase it as, isn't adulthood about finding your people?
Tomato, potato.
Okay, I like your vibe. Welcome to No Clear Answers, where we explore the common challenges all humans, creators, and leaders face and break down preconceived notions of common self-help ideas. We are your hosts. I am Ricky Goldenberg.
I am Justin Mulvaney.
And I'm Dr. Corey Wilkes. Today, we are going to talk about all things stress, or at least many things stress. As far as when is it good, when is it bad, how does it trip people up, and hopefully give you some strategies and insights to help you better manage your own stress and hopefully maybe renegotiate your relationship with it. So, as is typical for most of these episodes, let's start off with, what is stress to you? Like, how do you define stress?
This is the question, isn't it? It's tough because when I was thinking about this beforehand, there are like strict medical, psychological, physical definitions of stress. Where the lineage of this term, as far as I know of it, is it has an inherently scientific meaning, right? There's stress in engineering. We stress test things. There's physical stress in medicine. There's psychological stress. And for me, I think of how do we hold the term in our common language. When I hear people throwing around terms of like, I'm stressed out, I've got a lot of stress right now. And I think this is another one of those terms that is, when we commonly use it, it is almost so vague as to be useless or doing a disservice to us. And I actually think that question, if you find yourself saying, I'm stressed a lot, what do I mean by stress, is actually the starting point for any inquiry into stress. I frequently, with people, some of the most common things I hear are overwhelm or discomfort. There's a physiological and mental experience of I'm stressed out, which is there's a lot of discomfort. I feel tense. I feel overwhelmed, like I can't handle everything that's coming at me, either from an emotional or from a sheer volume of things that are here. And so that's really what I hear people mean when they say I'm really stressed out. It's like, I'm not sure that I can handle this across some dimension. It's a signal. I'm not sure I can handle this. And I don't think that works for a Band-Aid. I think it's a really good inquiry to ask yourself, what do I mean commonly when I say I'm stressed?
What about you, Ricky?
That was a nice explanation. I'm trying to think what I would add to it. I think the main thing that I think about for stress specifically is it's a catch-all term, right? I think we use it to cover a lot of components that often it could be, if you want to use a different word for stress, you could use busy, you could use overwhelmed, you could use under pressure. I think oftentimes we use stress as a catch-all in a working or personal environment. The real complexity with stress that I find with folks that I'm working with is that it often creates like a cycle. When I say I'm stressed, I start to actually feel more stressed, and then stress kind of begets stress. Is one of the things that I've noticed in terms of how even when I try to define stress, I think that is a component that you have to consider, which is that not in all other emotions or things that we're talking about. Stress is one of those things that it feeds itself. It is a beast that feeds itself. So that when you say you are stressed, it does not actually usually release the stress. It often just creates it. It gets bigger and bigger. It's like a bigger and bigger rain cloud that puts itself over everything. It adds like a flavor. I sort of see stress often similar to sadness, I suppose. I see it as something that kind of sits right on top of you as a little rain cloud that comes with you. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you start to recognize it. That is my very scientific explanation.
I had something plug in for me as Ricky was talking, which if I were to use it, I think there's a benefit of speaking of this from how do we use it and where does it actually come from. I think the simplest synonym would be like stress means I'm being stretched. I feel like I'm getting pushed. I feel like I'm at the boundaries of what's possible for me. That's really what I hear a lot of people say when they're saying they're getting stressed. And then there's this question that I'm sure we'll explore later, which is, well, what type of stress is this, right? Is it the common lineage is eustress or distress? Am I in a state of distress where this is actively breaking me down? It's not so good for me. Or is this a state of eustress where I can see, oh, inherently this stimulus is going to be growth inducing? And I think that's also a function of what's the level of stress which I am under. But I really think for me at its most not negative or positive, it's just, I'm feeling stretched right now.
Justin, you trying to tee up this whole conversation for Corey? What you doing? Get out of here with your good ideas and thoughts.
I literally had written down like eustress versus distress, so that's super good.
Oh, damn. Getting in there before the doctor does.
Well, eustress is also just like a term very few people know, so that's awesome.
Never heard of it before.
Really?
Never heard of this
I'm glad
before.
we're going there then, because I assumed this was very common knowledge, but yeah, there's terms for it. Corey, what do you got for us?
Wait.
Yeah, eustress is EU stress, eustress. So
I had a feeling that it was not just the letter U like a U-turn, but I was going to wait. And someone was going to tell me what it is.
Or Y-O-U, eustress. It's eustress.
Yeah, I was like, am I blaming someone else? Someone will tell me. I just got to be patient.
So stress to me, right? The source of the thing that causes a stress is called a stressor, right? Stress or a stressor to me is something that activates a system in some capacity, right? When I experience a stressor, my system, psychologically, physiologically, whatever, becomes activated in some way. The difference to what Justin was saying is, eustress versus distress. Eustress is effectively adaptive stress. It activates your system productively. Distress, which is usually what most people mean when they say stress, is distress, tends to activate your system negatively or overwhelms your system to the point that it begins to break down in some capacity, right? Another way to look at it as far as the levels of activation for distress, a hassle is like a very minor stressor, right? It just, it's sort of a pain in the ass, but in the long term, over the course of a day, it's negligible. Okay. And then you have like the typical level of stressor or something that is stressful. You can still cope with it, but it is activating your system pretty highly. Versus a trauma, especially in a clinical setting, something that is traumatic vastly exceeds your system's ability to cope with that stressor. Okay. That's why a lot of people oh, it was traumatic. Like, no, it fucking wasn't. It was just stressful, right? Because if you can cope with it, it largely wouldn't be considered to the level of like legitimately traumatic because it didn't far exceed your system's ability to cope with the thing. Okay. But with normal stressors, with normal hassles, they activate your system for distress negatively, but relatively you can handle them on a per stressor basis. The issue is when you don't deal with them and you allow them to compound, right? When you let multiple hassles build up over the course of a day, or when you have a couple larger stressors and you don't do anything to let that pressure out, right? Or you don't do anything to effectively deal with that. Well, then now anything extra, right? We've all heard the saying, the straw that broke the camel's back, right? It's that sort of a thing of stress compounds if you do not effectively deal with it, because it will continue to activate your system to the point of overactivating it, to the point that it begins to break down. And that, I think, is what most people are familiar with, and why probably a lot of people are going to be tuning into this episode, is to try to figure that out specifically. But before we dive into all of the distress stuff, I do want to take a quick detour to talk about eustress, right? So when is eustress, when is stress itself maybe productive or good for us? Justin, what are your thoughts?
I was writing a ton down as you were speaking, Corey, because I think distress, eustress, in some regards, it is like some things categorically are just distressful. They are not going to incite growth. And some things, there might not be anything that's categorically eustressful. And so what I would say is eustress, in my experience, is both a function of the dose, the level of stressor, and recovery and integration. So I'll start with a really simple analogy, and then we can take it into the complexities of our lives, which is, think of something even like weight training. We were actually talking about this right before the show, okay, weight training, is it distressful or eustressful? Well, it depends is really the answer. If you go and you do a ton of weight training at a healthy dose, but then you're not giving yourself the right nutrition, you're not sleeping appropriately, you don't have the right conditions for recovery and integration, growth won't result. Right? There's this idea called the growth equation, which is stress plus rest equals growth. And so stressors have the capacity to be eustressors, but it's how we handle the post-stress in the stress thing that determines if it actually gets to be a eustressor. That's one. And then two, let's stick with this eustress. It is a matter of the dose, namely, it could be an exercise that has the capacity for growth. You could go up and squat and it has the capacity for growth. You have the conditions right. But if you put 500 pounds in the bar and the most you can do is 200 pounds, that will break you. It will become physical trauma and it will become distressful. And so if we think about taking the complexities of our lives and making them eustress, which for me, what I would say is eustress basically just means growth inducing. Two of the most important questions to ask are, what's the overall load? Is it so much so that it's either breaking me now or breaking me down so much that I can't recover? And two, am I creating the right conditions, both physical and mental, emotional, the right conditions to actually get and integrate the learnings, especially when we're talking about things like leadership and creation and in our careers? Do we have the right things to integrate the stress such that it's growth inducing and not just breaking us down? And so the conditions really, really, really matter.
I really like that. Ricky, what are your thoughts?
Justin, I love everything you said. I plus one. I think the thing that locked in for me as you were talking was about recognizing when we talk about eustress specifically, a term that I just learned today and now we'll use. When we're talking about eustress specifically, to me, that's that we're playing in the same space as growth mindset, excitement, like adrenaline hits. To me, it's when it's basically about stressing the system, but in a way that is still safe, that we are being pushed, but we're not being tossed over the edge, right? When we talk about imposter syndrome, a lot of that has to do with, are you actually being put into a place that you really can't perform, or are you just being pushed into a space of growth? And so when I think about the difference between eustress and the distress is what we talk about most of the time. But I think ultimately what I'm hearing in this conversation is also recognizing when stress is a little good, right? When stress is actually a tool, when stress is something that gets you excited or fired up or on a soapbox, or it might make you feel a little uncomfortable and you're put in a space of edge work, is basically what I think is really interesting. And so most of the time when we talk about stress, we just think about distress. Like that's what we're usually thinking about. We're thinking about stressors that are overwhelming us, that are the dark cloud that I was describing. But I think something that you both have really highlighted here, which is important to hit home, is that some stressors, they're actually around growth. They're actually around leveling up. They're actually around, I really like throwing in the word excitement, right? They bring you, they make you nervous. It's like, talk about going on a first date with someone that you're really into. That's not technically a distressor, right? It's a eustress. It's like, oh my gosh, I hope I do a good job. We're going to an interview that you care about. Your palms might be sweating. Your body might be responding in the same way that it would to like a larger stressor, but it's because you're actually excited. It's really tied back to the fear conversation that we were having recently, which is this idea of recognizing, is this stress actually a productive, supportive tool that is helping you get outside of your comfort zone, doing something different, challenging you in a way that is thrilling?
Ricky, that term you said, this is so commonly used, but something shifted for me of edge work, right? There's something, a couple things happened inside of me. One, I was like, well, shit, yeah, there's like edge work, and then there's like where it's just easy for us. It's just a layup for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's such an empowering cognitive shift from going, I'm really stressed, which is like I'm in to me victim mindset. The world is stressing me, versus being able to go, hey, I'm pushing some edges right now and I'm experiencing stress as a result, but I'm pushing some edges. I'm trying to do more than I've ever done before. I'm doing some stuff that's hard and scary for me. I even think that simple shift of owning it, which is not I'm getting stressed, but I'm pushing some edges of mine right now. And maybe the world is calling me out to it, but that's what I'm up to.
I love that
That's
reframe,
Eustress.
Justin. I love that reframe about recognizing that it's not happening to me. I'm also a participant in this as well. Even if you technically aren't, right? Like even if it's your manager came in and gave you something that's a really big challenge, it's still around that edge work. Corey, I want to hear from you too.
So when I think about eustress specifically and productive stress, there's this thing called the optimal level of arousal. And I mean, it can relate to sexual arousal, but it doesn't necessarily, right? It does apply. But in this case, arousal is more so just, psychological, physiological arousal as far as activation.
We're a bunch of frickin' toddlers. Like as soon as you start saying it, Justin and I can't keep our shit together. We are adult humans. Please continue, Corey. Sorry for interrupting your flow.
No, you're good. So with this optimal level of arousal, too little arousal impedes performance. And we can everybody's got dirty minds, right? So we can think about like literally like with a male with a penis, right? If you're understimulated, you're flaccid, ain't nothing going on. But if you are overstimulated, the same thing can also happen, right? Like if you're super fucking stressed, dudes, you can't get hard. Like you just fucking can't, right? Women, there are like dryness issues and things and vaginal, tinting and things, right? Justin is out of his fucking chair.
He left his chair. He's very concerned about how he's going to edit this. There's going to have to be a lot of beeps. For some reason, I'm deeply flushed and blushing. I am an adult.
But here's the thing. That's an example everybody can just fucking wrap their head around, okay? Because again, we're all thinking that is the example, okay? What this means is for any endeavor, sexual or otherwise, you need enough activation, but not too much activation. Too little activation, your performance is hindered. But too much activation, then it is too stressful and it is overtaxed, overwhelmed, and the system can also not perform adequately. There is this specific sort of Goldilocks zone of I am experiencing enough activation through stress to become activated, to perform, but not too much to underperform. Okay, so there's this, think about it as a Goldilocks zone. Go ahead, Ricky.
Can I ask a question? Because I'm hearing it like, for me, it's almost describing it as a bell curve, right? There's like an optimal space that we can be playing within. It's not, I'm not
That's a
having
shape
any,
you can imagine. Yeah.
right? Like there's not like, I'm not having, no, it's not too much. It's not too little. Is this still only for eustress though?
This
it
is
for
just
any stressor?
optimal
Just
level of
stress.
arousal.
Okay.
So the example that what we'd basically be saying is that Goldilocks zone would be eustress, and anything
Okay.
outside of that, as far as like too much activation, that would be getting into distress.
Cool. Thank
Okay.
you.
And then if you are understimulated, that's just a lack of stress altogether, which causes separate problems, right?
Like
Because
complacency.
stress effectively drives us to do a specific action, right? Think about like even some of these symbols like hunger is a stressor because when you are hungry, that drives you forward to seek out food. If you're not hungry, you are not driven, you're not activated to go seek food potentially. Okay. But again, it's like what are some ways that people cope with stress that are potentially maladaptive, right? They're experiencing the stressor, so then they go out and they do a thing that they think they're being driven to do, but they're actually just coping maladaptively, like stress eating, shit like that. Okay. So you need enough stress to move forward, but you don't want too much stress to where it is holding you back. And that to me is what eustress is this stress driving me forward or is it overwhelming me and holding me back? Okay. This is where something as simple as like a deadline can be eustress for you because you're like, okay, it isn't like this impending doom thing. This is just helping me hold myself accountable. It is driving me forward because I know when the deadline is approaching, it activates my system and focuses my attention and my actions to do this specific thing by that deadline. That would be an example of eustress. However, if you are the type of person who is more prone to stress, like distress, and you set a deadline that is unrealistic of I have to have this huge project done in 3 days because I read about fucking Parkinson's law or some shit. It's like, oh, that's fine. I'll make a super quick deadline and then I'll get a bunch of shit done. No, you fucking won't. You will just be overwhelmed because you have crossed from eustress to distress. Okay. You have exceeded your optimal level of arousal and now become overwhelmed and overactivated. That is how I kind of think about when it can be productive. Go ahead, Justin.
We can talk about this at multiple levels, but I think everybody has had this experience, and I'll go micro macro. Ricky, I think I've heard you talk about this, and I think we all agreed, which is like imagine just a day where you have a to-do list. What is the ideal number of items on your to-do list to get the whole to-do list done? And almost everybody can play this game where there's actually a number. You'd think the lower the better. But there's actually something that happens when we're really underemployed, under-aroused, under-stressed. We're like 2 things on our to-do list can sometimes take us 14 hours of a day.
Parkinson's law.
Yeah, whereas we hit like there's this sweet spot where we're like, okay, I now know I need to mobilize to get these things done, but it's not so much that I'm overwhelming myself with it, right? Then I get into distress. I start to shut down. Not enough. I'm not mobilizing. There's a right amount to mobilize. And I see this happen in careers a lot too, where people can be underemployed in their roles and actually start to cause a lot of trouble for themselves and struggle to even show up. And again, vice versa, where they're so overwhelmed that they shut down. Really is a sweet spot where I'm both adequately aroused to fully mobilize, and there's enough stimulus here for me to then grow around that. Yeah, there's a checkbox on YouTube where they ask, is this for kids or not? This episode will be no, it's not made for kids for sure. And I'll have to check some explicit content.
Wait, I hope that box is already checked in general for the amount that we swear.
No. Yes,
if
it's
I
always
show
no.
up, it isn't for kids.
Yeah.
I hope this is an always no situation.
No.
But I think that's helpful too, is that sort of what we're describing is this Goldilocks. I like this term, this Goldilocks, of recognizing, and even just in the example that you're giving is the to-do list, which is something I do love to talk about, is like some days 2 is the right number, sometimes 10 is the right number too, right? Some of it also depends on how have we been supporting ourselves, what systems do we have in place, what have we been doing in order to be in a restorative state, and that also impacts how much eustress or where we sit on the curve. Because sometimes something that would throw you into distress and might shut you down, a different day doesn't. And it might be because you've done it before, or it could be just that you did not sleep last night and you don't have the energy to deal with that. Right. So I think that's the other thing that's important here too, is that when I think about this space of Goldilocks zone, it shifts, and it shifts depending on the day. It depends on the time, right? Sometimes I talk about this with folks that I'm working with. That's something that's really stressing them out. You go back in time 10 years and you're like, oh my gosh, 10 years ago, you could not even come close to handling this. But now you've handled all these other stressors. This is freaking peanuts in comparison. And so it's true. Over time, we grow and our ability to handle stress hopefully increases. But it's also still recognizing that on any given day, you might hit capacity earlier than you anticipated. And just being able to recognize that in yourself is a wildly powerful tool. I know, I'm sure we'll talk about tools and ideas and stuff later, but I just think it's important to recognize here too, is that when we're talking about this Goldilocks zone, that's not stagnant. That changes and shifts over time and over different days. And something that stresses you out today might not stress you out tomorrow, might stress you out the next day.
So then when it comes to, does anybody else have anything for eustress and when it can be productive?
No, I feel like we all learned that eustress can be incredibly productive to help you grow as a person.
Cool. So then the next piece is with distress specifically, right? Which is, again, is the type of stress most people are most familiar with. And no is problematic, right? So with this, what are the main sources of distress and why are they so persistent for people?
Justin just sighs. He just sighs before he starts.
It wasn't a sigh. It was because it is a big question.
Yeah.
I'm going to go, there were two thoughts that dropped in. I'm going to go with the easier one and then the harder one that I'm not sure what's going to happen when I open that door. The first one is simply too much. It is like we said, the dose of anything, when it gets too high, it gets into distress. And especially with folks who have ambition, with folks who started companies, with folks who are trying to work for themselves, the tendency is to try and do everything and try and do a lot. And also we never want to say no. And so one of the most plaguing sources of stress that I see, of distress for people, is there's too much on my plate. And almost always, I'll never forget this moment. I was coaching a woman and she was talking about this issue. She was like, God, I just feel like I've got way too many balls in the air. There's too many. I can't handle them. And I asked her, when do you remember first feeling this way? And she was like, I don't know, when I was 8 years old. And I was like, so do you think that's a function of the world, or do you think that's a function of something in you? And she was like, oh, damn. And so it's easy for us to say, oh, it's just the world's always demanding too much of me. But if the world is always demanding too much of you, and that's been happening for decades now, and maybe check, was there anybody around you who, when you were young, was that way? Frequently, there's something internally that has me continuously putting too much on my plate. I don't have a muscle for saying no, and I don't have a muscle for getting things off of my plate. That is simply the huge one in most people's professional contexts. The second one, this is hard, but it's a function of how people relate to things. There's something here that's working an edge of mine that gets me really into emotional reactivity. It really scares me. It really challenges an identity. There's just an internal edge that's getting pushed here that really is it's fritzing up a lot of fear and emotions and sensations. That one is harder to work through. We're not trying to answer the question yet of what to do with it. That one is really challenging. That's where therapy and coaching and other things come in. But if I were to generalize, those are the two most frequent things I see with clients. There's just too much, or I'm pushing some edge that is really triggering and working something for me.
Ricky, what about you?
Well, there was something that you said there, Justin, that I thought was really interesting too, which was in that second category. I also think it depends on the relationship that you have with the emotion as well. And it brings me back, oh crap, I can't think of her name, but she wrote Toxic Positivity. One of my favorite things that you pull out of that is rather than I am stressed, it's I am feeling stressed. Right? Just this relationship, that metacognition around our emotions and being able to remove yourself from being in the emotion and letting it feel like that storm cloud, it's never going away, versus being able to recognize that this is a moment in time, that I might need support, that I ultimately probably have some controls. So that was one of the things that was really resonating for me as you were speaking, Justin, which is this idea when it comes to distress and what it comes from. Oftentimes it comes from things that are seemingly outside of our control. Right? It's the deadline that was given to you by someone else that is not feasible. It's the having to navigate a divorce or moving or the death of a loved one. Right? It's these big stressors that happen and really impact your well-being. And oftentimes I think they're the ones that feel outside of your control, that they are something that we can't influence, that are impacting us. And then also, Corey, you said this really well in the beginning of this conversation, which is around stress compounds. So I think the other thing is that sometimes there's distressors that just exist, right? Going through a divorce, that's going to fucking rock you. Justin, you were hinting at this, talking about the client that you spoke with, which is that if we are just allowing stress to compound, to sit on top of each other, and we come back to the straw breaks the camel's back, that little extra thing could technically even be eustress in a normal day. But because we haven't gone through the work of either deep therapy or coaching or self-reflection and work within ourselves, sometimes distressors are actually just the act of compounding because we haven't navigated and worked through built up stress. We've created maladaptive response techniques to stress. Our mode is of stress. And there's one thing that I want to highlight here with distressors, which is that, especially if you work in a corporate setting, we have all worked with those individuals, or maybe we are those individuals who love the deadline, who only think they can work under stress, and almost that like gives them some kind of fucking heat. Yeah. Maybe you are that person. Maybe you've worked with someone like that person. I think that's also an interesting component here when we talk about distressors, these are the individuals who sort of are running at this temperature that it's up here. It like makes me actually, I start to get like overwhelmed, but it's these people that are like vibrating at this higher frequency. And it brings me back to some of the conversations we've had about like perfectionism and sort of like this vibe. It's like, oh, I must stay in this element of energy. And if I leave it, then I'm complacent. And so that's the other component that I think about when we talk about distressors, is that some of it's come on to me. It's something that is outside of my control. Some of it is that because I have had I've allowed stress to compound, I am unable to obtain and navigate in additional elements of stress. And there's this other element of distressor, which is like, this is my MO. This is my modus operandi. This is how I get stuff done. And that ultimately is a distressor as well. And if it's not a distressor for you, my boo-boo, it's a distressor for everybody else you're working with. Chill out.
There's a quote that I'm remembering, Ricky, that I think is useful for this. And in my head now, I'm attributing it to Tony Robbins, but I don't know if it was him, which is stress is the word that high performers use for fear. That latter category of how we're relating to things, it's frequently, oh, there's something about this that is scaring me. That move, that deadline my boss is imposing on me, my divorce, whatever. There's something in here that is terrifying me. It's terrifying my identity. It's in some way, I'm organizing myself around this thing, my beliefs, my sense of worthiness, how I'm constructing worthiness is making this thing feel really big and scary and stressful. And that's what I'm hinting to when it's yes, there are these outside things, and they are inherently stressful, but so frequently it blooms up because it's how we're relating to that thing our beliefs about it, how we're sourcing worthiness or safety or control from it, that causes this sense of stress, which is so frequently often, I am scared shitless around something.
And I think that's important that we're highlighting here is like the stressor is legitimate. We're not saying that that's not, of course it's a stressor. It's more about how are we working within our response to the stressor.
For me, as far as the main sources of distress and why they're so persistent, on a very, very foundational level that damn near everybody has heard about, but also probably neglects, is what psychologists call the big three. In health psychology, we call it the big three: sleep, diet, and exercise, right? These are the foundations for everything else, right? So many people neglect their sleep. So you as soon as you wake up, you're already kind of fucked. Like first thing in the day, you're fucked. So then you over caffeinate or do something else to compensate for that, right? Well, now you've thrown off your sleep again that evening, right? Like a lot of times your caffeine consumption early in the day will fuck up your sleep later that night. That's why I try to not have caffeine until like I've been awake for like 30 to 60 minutes. Not because I read or I watched a Huberman podcast, although he's got a lot of great information. I have friends who are like registered dietitians who are like, yeah, absolutely don't do that. It will fuck your sleep up. Okay. Because of how it fucks with your hormones. But so I have triangulated that data point. However, it is really easy to fuck up your sleep. But when you are super stressed out, and then when you lay down to go to sleep that night, you stay up even later. Or you do like the what is it called? Like revenge bedtime procrastination.
Revenge procrastination.
Where you stay up
Got
fucking
excited.
off on your phone, looking at Instagram or TikTok or whatever. And
Because
then
you have no control.
Now, because you were so busy throughout the day. So now you're actually postponing the time you actually get to sleep by an hour or even 2 or 3 hours because you're just fucking off on your phone. So not only did you go to bed late, you have now laid down and now you are not going to sleep for another hour or two. But here's another fun thing. This fucks you up psychologically. You have now deconditioned yourself to where that your brain no longer associates your bed with sleep. Okay. Psychologists say the only thing you should do in your bed is sleep and sex. Don't ever be in your bed otherwise, because it'll decondition your mind. But if you only do those things, then when you get into your bed, you either get sleepy or horny. Okay. It's a whole thing, whole different conversation. You're fucking your sleep up in a lot of different ways. You're over caffeinating, you're staying up late on your phone. It's a whole thing. Because why are you doing that? I'm on my phone to decompress. You are not decompressing. You're distracting. You're not decompressing. And you're fucking up your sleep. Exercise. I'm too busy to exercise. Well, guess what? When you don't exercise, you get more tired and you are more susceptible to stress in the future. Not only can exercise be cathartic, the outright act of it, but there are a lot of downstream positive effects of exercise. Okay. And then with your diet, well, I'm too busy. I'm too stressed to take care of, my diet. I'm just going to grab something real quick. Well, now you may have indigestion, you may have insufficient nutrients, so now you're more tired, you have more brain fog, you have all this other shit. A lot of times, basically, indigestion can mimic anxiety, which then makes you think you're even more stressed than you are. Okay, they've done a lot of like research around like gut health and how that affects stress levels. You can look all that shit up somewhere else. I'm not your guy. So at a very, very foundational level, sleep, diet, and exercise, if you neglect them, make you far more susceptible to any stressor you come across in your day. Okay. But beyond that very, very foundational thing, one, a lot of people have legitimate stressors and obligations, right? You're trying to pay the bills, right? If you have like, job, entrepreneur, or whatever, like you got to pay your fucking bills. That can be super stressful, right? A lot of times, especially as you get older, caregiving comes into play. Right. I've coached, many multiple people where it's like, I am old enough to where I am both taking care of my young children and my aging parent. Right. And they have their own health issues. They're not, taking their meds or doing the shit they're supposed to do. I got to cart them around to doctor's appointments, but then also take my kid to fucking soccer practice. And I got to run a fucking business and maintain my marriage. Like, how in the fuck does all that work? right? That isn't even including the stress of the work you're doing. That's all the shit before you even walk into the office, right? And that is what you leave the office to go back to. Because again, stress compounds. So you're not sleeping well, you're not exercising, you're not taking care of your diet, and you got all this ancillary shit from your environment, right? That is some real shit a lot of people struggle with. Okay. Learning to balance your life and work obligations. Always being on, especially for entrepreneurs and creators. They're always on, it feels like, right? And a lot of times they add onto this by comparing themselves to other people. Well, that person, they manage it. Well, she has 6 kids and runs a fucking multi-million-dollar company. Like, she's fucking crushing it. Why can't I? I should be able to do that too, right? You're shitting all over yourself. And then a lot of people, in addition to all that, because again, all this compounds, wear stress like a badge of honor. And I used to do this a lot with being busy, right? Oh, I'm too busy. And it was like the fact that I was busy meant I was important. The fact that I was busy meant I sucked at prioritizing and getting shit done. That's all the fuck it meant. But
I hate busy.
I wore it as a badge of honor, like all through fucking college and early, postgraduate. I was like, oh, I'm too busy. Oh, I'm too busy. And it's like, I've spent 10 years being too busy. I fucked something up a long time ago. But a lot of people use stress as a badge of honor, either because, like what you all were saying, they feel it drives them forward when it's just like perfectionism. You didn't succeed because of your stress. You succeeded in spite of your stress. You didn't succeed because of perfectionism. You succeeded in spite of perfectionism. It's very much that. But if you are wearing it as a badge of honor because you think you're supposed to, it is, and you've wrapped your identity up with it, it is incredibly hard to address it. That is why it is so pervasive and so persistent, because you're wearing it like a badge of honor, because you've tied your identity to it. You know no other way to be other than to be stressed out and overwhelmed all the time. That is what I see, all of that compounding as to why so many people struggle with it.
I hate busy.
A tangent.
Hate busy.
Yeah.
Do it.
For the busy, but also the always onness.
Ugh.
This one, I just want to offer something to people if they feel this is true for them. The one thing I'll invite you into is don't delude yourself into thinking you're always on because it's effective.
No, you're trash. You're trash.
Don't delude yourself into that belief. And if you go, what do you mean? It's because there's so much on my plate. Let's just use a couple experiences you probably have. And I see this all the fucking time, especially with founders, is they say, I have to always be on. There's so much on my plate. And then they go on vacation for a week or two. And they come back and they go, oh my God, I had so many good ideas that make all of that stuff so irrelevant. None of it mattered. So there are periods where what we do calls us into really pushing and putting a lot into it. But just note that it's very rarely about actually being effective in what needs to be done. And it's more often, I don't know how to turn off. I'm scared and I don't know how to be with my emotions. There's something in me I don't know how to be with. Therefore, I push. And then what this does is it reinforces itself into saying, like you said, Corey, it becomes an identity that goes, well, there's so much to do. I have to be always on. And you've lost this entire other form of cognition, which is creativity and creative solutioning that makes so many of those things irrelevant. You are always on and you are making yourself blind. And
we're going to do an entire episode on busy.
Yeah.
That's what this conversation is telling me. We're doing an entire episode on busy. I'm getting so fired up. I could talk about this for another hour. We can't do it. We got to talk. We're going to do a whole episode on this.
I just want people to inspect when they notice they're in patterns of always on to go, is this actually because it's more effective, or is there something else that's going on here? How might this actually be making me less effective?
Love it. I love it.
Based on your all's work, what are the most common symptoms of stress that people may or may not identify as a symptom of stress? I can go first if you all don't know. So, for example, the things that I frequently see: irritability, right?
Like the fuse is shorter.
If you are irritable all the time and you don't seem to know why, right? Because like if a specific thing happens and then you get irritable at that thing, It's very obvious. But if you are just sort of like low grade irritable all day, every day, that is a very, very apparent symptom of stress, of overwhelm. Okay.
Mhm.
Fatigue is as well. So if you are always tired and always irritable, most likely stress is a huge factor. So is brain fog, right? Like if you just feel like you're thinking slower or you're not as creative, like Justin was saying, if it feels like you're going through the motions and thinking of the same thing over and over again, and you're not coming up with much clarity, with a real solution forward, that brain fog, that feeling of like you're just like wading through molasses, basically, that is also a very common symptom of stress.
I think yes, and all of those, 100%. And I also think they're a lot of them have correlation to the three that you were talking about, Corey: sleep, diet, exercise. So if I have a client, I recently was talking to a client they um, they don't sleep a lot, right? They're just someone who doesn't sleep a lot. But as we were probing, I found out that what's actually been happening is that they're waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning every single morning, unable to go back to sleep. And so they're just getting up. That's an indicator that you're under an exorbitant amount of stress, because even if you're someone who's like, I kind of only need 6 hours, if you are consistently getting, this person was getting like less than 6, maybe 5, and it was because they were waking up and under so much discomfort and insomnia that they couldn't actually go back to sleep. And the flip side of that as well, right? If you're sleeping 12-hour days and can't wake up, then there's probably something else going on there. So that's sleep. For diet, that could look like binging or not eating, right? Like, how is your relationship with food? Are you eating nourishing food? Are you just craving crappy food? Are you not eating at all? I know that that's something that happens to me actually when I'm super stressed, is that like I do the opposite. I forget to eat. And then at the end of the day, I'm like, I'm so hungry, right? That's an indicator that something's wrong if I've skipped meals, because I fucking love food. And then around exercise, I think that is movement in terms of like, how do you feel in your body, right? Like or do things hurt in weird places? So sleep, diet, and exercise, I think the opposites of those, and playing with that also as an indicator that someone is under pretty exorbitant stress, in addition to the short fuse, the irritability. And also short fuse irritability doesn't always look like anger or rage. It's like, I remember I would work with a woman who, if she hadn't slept well, if she was overwhelmed, she would cry a lot more easily, right? Like her emotions came to the surface much more quickly, that she felt more emotional than she was previously. I ran into that recently, actually. I was taking a medication for trying to not throw up all the time in second trimester of this pregnancy. And I was like, I'm so emotionally charged. And I knew it. I was like, something is wrong. And I was talking about it with my therapist, bless her. And at some point I was able to go off the medication. I was like, oh, it's because I'm so fucking tired. Like my body has been put into the space of fatigue that I can't even function, and that brain fog and that emotional component was coming up more. So those are some of the other ways that I've seen it with folks that I work with.
Yeah. So in addition to everything that's covered, a lot of physical symptoms, a lot of weird things happening in our bodies, a few of the psychological things. You both have hinted to this, but the root for me is a sort of, as a mentor of mine said, big fucking dealness to everything.
Mm.
And that might be irritability. That might be I'm crying. But when everything starts to feel like a really big deal, and especially small stuff, right? My partner was supposed to go grocery shopping last night and she didn't. How are we going to eat? Somebody cut me off today. They didn't have my normal coffee. Like when everything starts to feel like it's a big deal, that's a sign. Lots of stress. There's a certain thinking I start to find in people that is, some might call it black or white. Some might call it all or nothing. I might say when things start to become I have to do it this way. We just have to. We just have to. When creative capacity and the ability to envision other possibilities falls off of a cliff, it's usually a sign that there's a lot of stress, because under that stress, my ability to envision and pursue alternative possibilities is one of the first things to go. And the last one that I'm almost hesitant to say, because a lot of people are probably going to be like, oh, but that's me all the time. And I would say, yes, boo-boo, that's the point, is a real loss of enjoyment of things outside of even the stressful context or of work contexts. So if suddenly you normally love weight training or running or cycling or time with your wife or playing an instrument or whatever, and when you go to do that, even outside of the thing that's stressing you out, you just can't find enjoyment in it. That's a sign for me the system's taxed. Even for things that are reliably unstressful and enjoyable for you, you cannot source joy. Lots of stress.
This also, so like for me, for example, I can tell when I am getting super stressed because, I don't label it as I am sad or stressed. I label it as I'm irritable and dismissive, right? Like that is how my stress tends to show up, right? I am irritable throughout the day for any little thing, and I get super dismissive. I sort of like hole up because I feel threatened, right? Because a stressor is something that activates you, but to a certain extent, after a certain extent, you feel threatened and then you go into like defensive mode, right? One way that I deal with that is I hunker down, right? So I say no to everything. I'm just super dismissive, whatever. Sometimes I'm just an outright prick, depending, right? Which that's gotten better as I've gotten older and more aware of shit. But another really key thing that happens is I stop doing a lot of the things that I enjoy, right? Like, oh, I'm too fucking busy. I can't go to the gym today, right? And occasionally that is, if you do it occasionally, that's different, right? Sometimes you outright have a deadline you got to fuck with, and that's fine. But if you consistently do it, that causes this catch-22, this very vicious cycle of I'm no longer doing the things that I enjoy, which prevents me from de-stressing, compounds and makes me more susceptible to future stress, which then I am now so stressed I can't do the fun things anymore. And you go on and on and on, right? So one question is that, like, when was the last time you did something you legitimately enjoyed? When was the last time you took time for yourself, right? If you're like, fuck, I love going to the gym, but I haven't been to the gym in 3 weeks, then for the last 3 weeks you've been stressed as fuck and maybe haven't registered it because you've been in survival mode. Right? That's a huge thing, is the things that we most love to do are the first things we stop doing when we go into survival mode. When we are too stressed, we say, okay, it's just like when you're like actually stressed, like in an actual survival like situation, you instantly have to pee because your system is like, get rid of any excess weight, piss and shit yourself, vomit, whatever the fuck you got to do, because that is dead ass weight. And you need to be as light as possible so you can run as quickly as you can, right? That is one of the reasons you get nauseous, have to pee, and sometimes people get like stress diarrhea. That's fucking why, right? It's that sort of thing, is we reflexively get rid of anything we consider extra. But for many of us, we include self-care type shit as extra. So we throw it away.
Corey, I made up a story there that you said stress diarrhea because you thought it was better than saying shitting yourself again, and I find it hilarious.
Dude, I legitimately know people who, when they get stressed out, they immediately have to shit. Like,
I do
run
too.
to the bathroom, have to shit.
Yeah, I do too. That's a very real one. When you said that, I started laughing and thinking of that friend. I was like,
there you go.
It's hilarious when it happens. And also, it's not always coming from something that's like a legitimate stressor. It could be like a eustressor that they're actually like excited for, but it happens.
So, evolving from this conversation,
Thank goodness.
how do people, both in your all's experiences and the work you do, how do people typically try to deal with stress that isn't effective, which then feeds into this cycle?
Corey, actually, what you were describing, I think, is one of the number one ways that I see it, which is that people they like bottle it up and like grin and bear it and just keep like holding it really tight. And they're like, I'm just going to fucking do it. And they stop doing the things that they enjoy. They stop going to the gym. They aren't spending time with friends and family. They're too busy. They're not taking care of themselves. And so that's one of the ways that I've seen that basically people are like, I'm just going to fight my way through, which, to be fair, if you're in a sprint, that's fine, right? If I have a deadline that's tomorrow, I can skip the gym today. I can recognize that today is not a gym day. It's going to be a rest day because I have other stuff to do. It might even be not even a rest day. It's just a skip day. It's fine. The complexity is that sometimes people are doing it and it's a marathon. That the project that they're working on or the element that's in front of them has taken priority. And so the idea is that, it almost shows up in the arrival fallacy that we've talked about in the past. If you haven't listened to that episode, it's fucking great. But this idea of like, when I launch the thing, then I'll be able to have time to work out and cook for myself and get more sleep. But that day doesn't come, right? It's almost a lot of pushing it off into a future problem for yourself without recognizing that it's probably not going to change. Something new is going to come up. I hear from people that they're like, oh yeah, when the kids are back in school, I'm going to have all this free time. You fucking not. Those kids going to be sick in 3 days. They're going to be home and then you're going to be sick and then your partner's going to be sick and then the other kid's going to get sick. So there's this idea of, I just need to grin and bear it and hold on tight and make my way through and kind of muscle my way in, versus taking that step back and recognizing, okay, how can I delegate? How can I be responsive? How can I be supportive to what I need? What do I need to move off my plate? What do I need to reprioritize or, sort of remove in terms of element? I think that's the number one thing I see from people is this desire to kind of hold it. And like, I'm just going to deal with it and it's going to be fine. And then it bubbles up and leaks out in all these other places.
We've talked about this in prior episodes, this nuance and difference between behaviors that genuinely recharge us versus rest, or really like behaviors that just kind of numb us out. When I think of people who are overly stressed and mistakes they make, this is what they do, is frequently the authentically recharging activities have a little bit more activation energy to them. Requires a little bit more to actually plug into those behaviors to recharge. And they cut those things because of the activation energy. Might be a social group that it takes time to organize or it takes time to get to. It might be, again, a health class where we actually have to schedule it and get out there. But they cut the recharging activities and reach for the numbing activities, telling themselves, well, this is better because I'm not exuding the extra energy, and not realizing that those behaviors are just numbing them out. They're not actually recharging them. And this can be substances they reach for. Like Ricky said, it could be food, alcohol, other substances, zoning out on the couch. And listen, sometimes those behaviors are genuinely recharging. But frequently what I see happening is, in addition to, like Ricky said, just grinning and bearing it or believing they need to push through or holding it in because they don't want to quote unquote burden others with it. This is a huge mistake, is they just don't say anything about it because they don't want to burden others, not understanding that connection will inherently be recharging to them, and being known will help them diffuse it. But the other big one is, starting to default for non-restful or recharging behaviors and just things that actually numb them out, that don't actually refill the tank.
Fully agreed. Like I don't drink or do anything, so I know it rarely even crosses my mind that a lot of people like numb themselves with booze and shit, because it's just that isn't part of my life. But that's a super good point, because it is super common. And again, unwinding with like a thing is very different, right? If it's almost like a treat to yourself of like, I work super hard, I really enjoy this, but I keep it, within due bounds, one glass in the evening of a thing, that is very different, right? Then it takes me, a case to get to bed, or I need to, a whole bottle of wine every night, like that. It becomes problematic, right? One of the things that I think about is like, is this activity like a breather? Is it just like a nice distraction? And when is it actually helping me recharge so that I can return to work with renewed energy? Right. It's like something that I enjoy doing, right, with my girlfriend is like we would just sit in the evenings and we would just watch TV. Right. But I'm not a productivity guru. I rarely talk about productivity because it's just, I'm not your guy. But for us, and people are like, oh, well, Corey, like you all should like have a romantic dinner and like stare longingly into each other's eyes in silence for 30 minutes an evening. And you should have like, relationship check-ins every 2 weeks, like all that fucking shit. Cool. If you want to try to optimize your relationship, go for it. I'm not your fucking guy. We will sit on the couch and just watch TV and we legitimately enjoy it. For me, it is a good way to distance myself from my work half the time. And sometimes I fuck it up, right? Sometimes I have my laptop open and I'm trying to half work and half watch the TV and I do neither, right? I am fully guilty of that. But I'm not doing it with the expectation that this is going to help recharge me so I can fully show up to work tomorrow. I'm doing it because I just fucking enjoy doing it. I don't consider it self-care. Because for me, self-care, you should be better after doing self-care than before. Self-care to me, with very, very few exceptions, isn't getting a fucking mani-pedi. It isn't, getting a fun piece of food or going to the movies or all these other things that are like typical bullshit self-care, like a fucking self-care infographic. Do these 5 activities and you'll feel 100%. I think most of that is bullshit because at most it is a distraction. It doesn't actually recharge you. It may give you a break from work, but unless, just like we talked about with the burnout episode, unless you are doing it with the specific intention to disconnect, reflect, and recharge, that activity isn't actually helping you in the long run, which is why so many people that becomes like its own, like not addiction, but that becomes its own compulsion to do over and over again. Right? 3 nights a week, I have to do this thing. Every week, I have to do this thing. Every evening, I have to do this thing. The reason you feel compelled to do that thing over and over again is because it isn't actually recharging you. It's just giving you a very, very brief break in your very chaotic, stressful existence. If instead you found activities and you carved out time to engage in them, activities that legitimately help you disconnect, reflect, and recharge, one, you wouldn't have to do them you wouldn't do them compulsively, and you would be able to show up much more effectively in the work you do, which then creates a positive cascade effect, right? Where you get more done, you feel better about it, you have less need to do more legitimate self-care things, and on and on. It is easier to improve your sleep, diet, exercise, all that other shit. Ricky, go ahead.
Listen, we can have a whole session on self-care too. Today, now we're just getting separate episodes that we have to do. But I'm going to jump in here, which is one thing that I think is really important when we talk about distressors moving through it, is that self-care, right? Elements that will support you are going to be unique to you. So Corey, right there, when you're throwing out mani-pedis, for example, there's an important delineation there, which is that if a mani-pedi is something that I just do every Friday and it's part of my regular routine and I have to do it, then yeah, it's probably not being a restorative experience. If my mani-pedi is something that, dude, I look forward to when I sit down, I'm in a spa experience. I feel, when I leave that room, I feel fucking beautiful. I can walk around and I feel like a new lady. That's fucking self-care. So that's the other thing, is that I think it's really important that when we talk about self-care or like dopamine hits, what works for you is not going to work for someone else. I just saw something the other day. It was like a TikTok or a reel, and I thought it was fantastic. And I was talking about creating your dopamine menu, which is around appetizers, ones that are like short bursts that give you a little boost, which could be like going for a walk or a 2-minute dance party or whatever works for you, right? It's not fixing the situation. There's entrees, which are these really restorative activities, ones that could look like anything that's deeply restorative. For me, that's probably going to be a workout class, or for you, it could be like an hour-long massage if you do like massages. It could be like an experience of jiu-jitsu. Then there's sides, which are basically things that you do in conjunction with something that you don't want to do that makes it a little bit more enjoyable, which could be watching TV while also doing work on your computer. And then there's desserts, which are the ones that are kind of like, they might be numbing. They might not really be that restorative. It could be scrolling on your phone, and it's fine as like a little taste, but it's too much in excess.
I like that. And that's what I was saying, like with exceptions, right? So very good example, like with mani-pedis, right? If it is a form
That's why I
of
was like, don't fucking be calling shit on mani-pedis. That mani-pedi is like the thing that makes you fucking feel fire, and you are totally in the zone when it's happening. And you love choosing the new color. You just feel so fucking fuck you. Do
That's
it.
what I said, with exception, right? Because
Thank
like
you, Corey.
if it is a form of self-respect and of keeping
Mhm.
commitments to yourself, then it can be, in your words, restorative, right? Very, very much so. It's just a lot of people get it wrong and then wonder why their quote unquote self-care isn't actually helping deal with their stress.
Yeah, it's like when you go and you're like on Fridays I get coffee. It's like no. If the treat is every Friday and you get coffee, you're not even thinking about it, and you're not even paying attention to when you drink it. That's not a restorative activity to de-stress.
So then leads to the next question. What
Let's do it.
are effective restorative stress management strategies that you all use either in your own lives or with your clients?
Justin, I see you coming off mute. You want to tell us something?
Yeah. So as we were going through the episode, I kind of chunked this into a little framework, which is we can think of this from a preventive standpoint and then from recovery and or integration. And preventive, the thing I found to be most effective is I've heard people in exercise refer to this as it's the 80% rule, which is for most of us, actually a lot of Olympic athletes train this way. They don't train where most of their workouts, they're leaving it all out on the floor. They're actually training where they've used about 80% of their energy. They're keeping 20% in the tank. And not only do I find this is to be an effective way of thinking about work from a longevity standpoint, which is that I just don't risk burning out because I'm never pushing to that point. I also find it's really useful from a constraints and creativity standpoint, which is if I find myself having to reliably put out more than 80%, what's going on? How can I shift it back? What structures do I need to shift to get back to that? As well as I find frequently if I go past 80%, my creativity starts to plummet in general. And what I'll posit is each extra unit of effort after 80% is both less effective. You get less output for it. And at some point in there, almost always it gets diminishing. I'm actually starting to cause more work from myself from continuing to push beyond this. And I am talking to you founders and leaders of teams who are always on and are firing emails after 8 p.m. at night. I know so many of them who there's not a single email that you can usually send after 8 p.m. that's not causing more trouble for your team and therefore you the next day. So 80% rule, I think, is actually a really brilliant thing. Now, listen, sometimes we're going to give less than that because we just need to recover. We don't even need to know why. Bad night's sleep, we're sick. Sometimes it's going to call us up to give more than that. Some of my favorite days are work when I gave 100%. But we're shooting for 80%.
I love it.
From a recovery and integration standpoint, one thing that I think is really useful that's a more long-term strategy, but Corey, you pointed to this earlier in the episode, is diversifying your identity and where you get value and what is important to you outside of work. Because what I find is when we start to just identify with one part of our life is where we source meaning and joy and worthiness from. If that one area of our life starts to struggle, everything is shaking. Our whole sense of worth and joy is shaking versus if I'm diversified to, I value well-being. I have relationships that are important to me. I have a creative outlet and I have my work. If one of those things becomes stressful, I have a more resilient foundation that I'm operating on. And the last thing that really comes up for me that is, if we think of this as the context that I set up at the very beginning, which is stress plus rest equals growth, it's not just the dose, which we covered in 80%, but it's also, do I have the conditions for recovery and integration? A practice I really think is such a big win and can be so helpful is just a journaling practice. I think meditation has been so hyped for so long now, and journaling has been so underhyped. And using journaling is just a way to check in with yourself and go, what's important to me right now? What's stressing me out right now? What's going on in here? Such that I can integrate all of my learnings in managing my life better. I think it is so underrated. And if you're hearing this and you're curious about journaling, but it hasn't stuck, here's what I tell people. Make the habit. One, I recommend first thing in the morning before you've looked at your phone or any shit, because then you're most in touch, you're most available to yourself then. Your mind hasn't gotten caught up in any social structures or anything like that. You're really available to you. And secondarily, I advise the rule, all you have to do is write one word. You don't have to do any more than that. Set the bar really low. You can show up and go, nope, don't feel like writing today. Great. You've journaled and you've checked in with yourself. The reality is, I don't feel like writing today. But keeping that as the habit for the days where you spout out 4 pages and really unlock a ton of insight, so valuable. What I've told people is when I first started doing this, and I've seen this with other people, we go from having these huge monstrous insights like once a quarter or twice a year or once a year because things have built up so much that we burst, to just a more steady flow of insights and being in touch with yourself. And so if we're talking about integration for emotional and psychological stressors alongside of coaching and therapy, which is amazing, journaling is my number 1 recommendation.
Corey, would you like to go next? Oh, wait, quick thing. Just a reminder to all those founders and entrepreneurs and leaders, in almost all email management tools, you can schedule an email. You can just schedule it. So even though you wrote the email at 8 o'clock, you don't have to fucking send it at 8 o'clock. You can schedule
don't schedule it. Don't schedule it. Just don't write it. Because whatever, this isn't a rule, but here's what I see. At 8 o'clock, they've got the heebie-jeebies. They're stressing themselves out. They're burned out. And so even that scheduled email, when it flies out the next morning, is gonna wreak havoc. Just don't send emails after like 8 p.m. Just don't. Try it on. See what happens.
Put your phone down. Just put it down.
Just
put
it down.
your phone down.
Go have a hamburger and talk to a friend.
I just don't send emails and have like a month-long backlog of shit I need to
This is true.
to.
We spend a lot of
creates
time with
different
Corey.
stress.
First-hand experience. Corey does not check emails.
We probably spent about 6 months just figuring out how the fuck to get in contact with Corey, and I'm still not sure. I'm still not sure the best way to get in contact with Corey, and I like it.
It is largely because I have the attention span of a gnat, so I, by default, turn off all of my notifications. Even my texts are like all muted, which is why sometimes like I'll check the group chat and be like, fuck, there are 30 messages, my bad. And then I just respond with a fucking GIF or something.
Yeah, so, he's like, here I am.
Well, I have an Android, so I can't just like a message. So here's sort of how I think about stress management and things. One, check out the burnout episode. We have a ton of, ideas and strategies around that one. Obviously very much do something that allows you to disconnect, reflect, and recharge. But elaborating on that, I think things that allow you to cultivate connection with other people is super important. Humans are social creatures by nature. So like for me, that is jujitsu, right? Jujitsu is super effective for me. One, because I literally can't think about all the stressful shit because somebody, like another human being, is actively trying to like strangle me unconscious or break my arm or something. That wholly focuses my attention on the present moment. And then after that 3-hour, session, I've had multiple hours away from the stressful thing. So now I can think on it again with clarity I didn't have before, because I haven't been swimming in that stress. So now I can look at it and be like, fuck, this thing I thought was like a huge deal, a big fucking deal, Justin's talking about, just fucking isn't. Or here is a solution that I couldn't think of when I was bogged down in stress soup, right? Having conversations with friends also facilitates connection, right? There are so many times where like I've been stressed out, or like I've had a constant stressor in my business or something. And then I go and I get coffee with another creator friend, and just the connection and knowing like other people also struggle with this, or, maybe they gave me, their perspective, even if they didn't, just being able to process it is super helpful to not keep bottling it up. So it's connection. Another thing is contemplation, right? Justin, I'm such a huge fan of journaling and finding like a meditation practice that works for you. They're not mutually exclusive. You can even make journaling in and of itself a meditation practice. It's very good. If the audience, if you all want us to at some point put together some sort of journal prompt thing, let us know, because we all love journal prompts, and that could be a fucking dope, either digital download, physical journal, book, something. Like, I'm all fucking for that. Let us know. But so connection, contemplation, collaboration, right? Who can you work with to help share the load, right? There's this thing in psychology called social facilitation. So you may have, this podcast is case in point, right? So there is social loafing and social facilitation, right? It really depends on the type of person you are. Social loafing is like tug of war, where, oh, well, everybody else on my team, they're pulling their weight, so I don't have to, right? If you pass the buck, that's social loafing. But if instead, when you are in the presence of others, it actually improves your performance, that is social facilitation, right? That is, if you like workout, like group workout classes, because it pushes you to perform better, right? The three of us, we are constantly to some degree paranoid that we are not doing enough compared to the other two. And that keeps us honest and keeps us doing our part. And if we feel like we're not, we process it like, hey, how are you all? Where are you at? Oh, well, I feel like I'm doing too much. Okay, cool. Then we'll pick up the slack, right? That has been really helpful for us with this podcast, right? So who can you collaborate with to share that load, to tap into that social facilitation that a group gives you? And then clarity. Trying to figure out like what actually matters and what doesn't. Because most of the time when we are stressed out is because we are trying to do too many things. And most of them just don't fucking matter. In life, very, very few things actually matter, actually warrant your time, energy, and attention. So of all the things that you're currently stressing out about, how many of them actually fucking matter? Like, one question I ask myself all the time is, will this matter in a day, a week, a month, a year, 10 years? Only the things that are a yes all the way through 10 years are the things that I allow myself to really, really focus on and allow stress more purchase in that relationship. Because it's like, this is stressful because it is so important. I am so emotionally invested in this work, in this outcome, that I need to dedicate more time, energy, and attention to dealing with this. And that also allows me to kind of filter out the things that won't matter in a week or won't even matter tomorrow, right? So that's a super, super clarifying question I ask myself that is very, very powerful. Those are the things that I kind of think about is connection, contemplation, collaboration, and clarity. Like those, I look for activities or practices I can engage in that facilitate at least one of those four things. Ricky, what you got?
+1 to everything here, right? Like all of these things are good. I think the only things that resonated with me that I would add on to this long ass list of things that might work for you is one of the ones is that, especially if you're in that space of being, you're already super stressed, you're in that triggered space, that really reactive, responsive space. You're that founder who does want to send that email at 8 p.m. Something that I really like is, so write the email, but don't send it. Really helpful, especially to help us shift out of reactive, responsive. If you're in this place that I'm constantly on, I'm basically feeling this adrenaline rush all the time. I'm super, super stressed. It's, to me, there's a huge benefit in finding these beautiful moments to kind of slow down a little bit. And so still write the email, just let it sit there, right? It's a beautiful journaling exercise, actually, if someone's pissed you off, rather than sending that nasty text, making that irritable phone call. Sit down and just write it out and then come back to it. You probably don't need to fucking send the email. And actually, when you look at it the next day, when you've calmed down, when you've rested, that email, you sound look great, great. And we should not write that email. We should think about it differently. But so to me, it's similar to the journaling practice that Justin's talking about. That Corey, we all fucking love journaling. So that's one. A second one that I think is really helpful, especially if you're in this heightened state already, I call it clear the shit, which is basically write down everything that you're fucking putting up with. Because you're probably putting up with a lot of stuff. You haven't even navigated all of the stressors that are impacting you. What's everything that's pissing you the fuck off? And from there, you can actually make some decisions. Some of it you might use the lens that Corey outlined, which is this going to matter 10 years from now? Yes. Okay. So I do need to deal with this thing that's pissing me off. I do need to deal with it. This is something that's important to me. But there are other components on this list that you might be able to delegate, you might be able to outsource, you might be able to reduce, you might be able to ignore. And basically what you're trying to do is you're clearing out the cobwebs a little bit. I think that can be really effective because oftentimes with stressors like this, they compound, right? If I have a list of 50 things that I have to do, but I go through this exercise and I'm like, really, I got to do 5 and I got to hire someone for those other 3. And the rest of these are just me losing my mind, it can really help create a little bit of expansive space within yourself, and it can be really effective. And then the last one that I'll highlight, we talked about it in the burnout episode, but the Nagoski sisters, they wrote a book. It's all about completing stress cycles. So if you have compounded stress that's sitting in your body, they have 7 tactics that you can use in order to try to complete stress cycles to sort of remove some of them. Of course, breathing, like meditation, is one of them. But the other ones are movement, which doesn't have to be like a mass. It can be a little dance party. It could be going for a walk. It doesn't have to be an hour-long sweat sesh. Laughing, like really deep belly laugh, like watching something that's so fucking funny that it makes you fall off your chair can really stress. Crying. I love talking about these in conjunction with each other, but having a damn good cry. Listen, if I'm on an airplane, I'm going to watch the saddest fucking movie. I don't like sad movies, but on an airplane, when I'm all by myself, I'm going to cry it all out. It's super helpful. Create. That could be painting, but it could be daydreaming. It doesn't have to be I don't have to create new art. I could just literally daydream for a hot minute. Connection is one of the ones, Corey, that they talk about too. And you were talking about that and it was really resonating with me, which is that connection could also just look like giving like a compliment to the barista that you're ordering a coffee from. Have you ever had that experience, right? You're like walking down the street and someone is coming towards you and you're like, man, you got a great outfit on. I fucking love those shoes. It costs you fucking nothing to be like, those are great shoes. Have you ever had someone be like, those are great shoes to you? God damn, your day is so good. That connection point, it doesn't have to be that I'm going to sit down, we're going to spend 3 hours together. It's actually just having this moment that we're going one level deeper. And then the last one is physical touch. Not necessarily intimacy. It could just be like having that like sensation of I'm going to hold someone for maybe a slightly too long hug. And that can actually release a lot of stressors. Justin, you don't want a too long hug? He seems uncomfortable about the too long hug.
Consensual hugging.
A consensual
I don't like the judgment of a too long hug. Maybe it's just a longer hug. Too long
just a
makes
longer
it seem
hug.
like just a longer
Two hugs definitely exist.
Yeah, but that's one of the other ones that I love in terms of like completing stress cycles, especially if you're feeling very stressed. You might use some combination of those. And all of the ones that I just listed, they're like 2 minutes long. This isn't like, oh my gosh, I have to take the day off to reduce my stress and go to a spa. It's like, oh, I'm just going to find these little moments of joy. And that dopamine menu that I was talking about, I fucking love that. That hit me today and I'm so into it.
So then bringing it home. Last minute observations or perspective you want to share with the audience around stress. I can go. Stress for me can facilitate a breakthrough or a breakdown, right? Depending if it is eustress or distress. So finding ways to maximize eustress and minimize distress, for me, is the most effective way to restructure your relationship with stress so that you can move forward and really staying in that optimal level of arousal.
Thanks, Core.
When we're in really stressed out and distressed states, the thing that stress whispers to us is this is all very complicated and this is all very hard. And it is and it isn't. As you've seen here, really there are a few simple but sometimes hard to reach for levers that push it and affect it. And so if I had anything, it would be the best way to manage stress is to not go over the waterfall of breaking down. And then the second best plan is to know what you need when you do go over the waterfall. Because when you're in it, it can be really hard to interrupt the loop without having some things that are pre-existingly set up.
Stress makes you human. Again, I think it's just what we do with it and how we navigate it. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help. And spending time with yourself and recognizing what works for you is going to be really, really, really helpful in unlocking you.
Yeah, this is one where don't take what we've said, what the self-help guru said, what the self-help book said for granted. Figure out what works for you. This is the work of your life. Figure out what the right balance is for you. Figure out what the cues are. Figure out what recharges you when.
Yep. And know that it's going
Experiment.
to change over time. All of this is going to change over time. Things that don't stress you now will stress you later. This is a long game.
Any other parting words?
No, friends.
Justin, you good?
Mwah. That's all I got.
Corey, take us out.
There you go. Bills.